The elevator lurched to a stop between the 32nd and 33rd floors, and that's when Caroline Mitchell's water broke. She grabbed her husband's arm, her face going pale. "Daniel, the babies. It's too early." Daniel Hammond, billionaire tech CEO, man who'd negotiated deals with heads of state, felt his knees go weak. "We're going to be fine. The emergency button." He slammed it repeatedly. Nothing. The elevator's emergency phone was dead. His cell phone showed no signal. Outside in the hospital corridor, Paramedic Grace Washington heard the alarm. She'd been dropping off a patient, about to end her shift after 16 hours. Every muscle ached. She was 53 years old and felt every year of it tonight. But when she heard, "Stuck elevator, woman in labor," she moved. What Grace didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know as she grabbed her emergency kit and ran toward the elevator shaft, was that she was about to deliver twins on the exact date, to the exact minute, that she'd given birth to twins herself 30 years ago. The twins she'd given up for adoption. The children she'd never stopped thinking about. The ghost that haunted every December 6th for 3 decades. And that in approximately 47 minutes, she would whisper something that would unravel both their lives and reveal an impossible truth. Caroline was breathing through contractions, her designer maternity dress soaked with fluid. Daniel held her hand, trying to remember anything from the birthing class they'd attended twice before his board meetings took priority. "They're coming," Caroline gasped. "Daniel, they're coming now." "The fire department." "There's no time," she screamed as another contraction hit. "Oh God, there's no time." Daniel hammered on the elevator doors, screaming for help. His billion-dollar empire meant nothing here. His connections, his power, his resources, completely useless in a metal box stuck between floors. Outside, Grace was already assessing the situation. The elevator was wedged. Fire department was 20 minutes out minimum. The woman inside was in active labor. "Ma'am," Grace called through the door crack. "My name is Grace Washington. I'm a paramedic. Can you hear me?" "Yes," Daniel's voice barely controlled panic. "My wife, the twins, they're coming early. We were coming for her scheduled C-section." "Okay, listen to me carefully. I'm going to talk you through this." But even as Grace said it, she knew. The gap in the elevator door was wide enough. Not comfortable, not safe by any normal standard, but possible. She was small, always had been. 5'3", 125 pounds. Colleagues joked she could squeeze through anywhere. "I'm coming in," Grace called. "Step back from the doors." "What? No, that's—" "Your wife is having twins in a stuck elevator. You want my voice through a door, or my hands helping her?" She didn't wait for an answer. Grace pulled off her jacket, grabbed her kit, and started squeezing through the 18-inch gap between the elevator door and the shaft wall. It was tight. Metal scraped her shoulders. For a moment, she was genuinely stuck, suspended 32 floors up, and thought, "This is how I die." Wedged in an elevator shaft on the worst anniversary of my life. Then she pushed through and tumbled into the elevator. Daniel caught her. Oh, thank God. Grace was already moving to Caroline, whose contractions were 90 seconds apart. "How far along?" 32 weeks, Caroline sobbed. "They're not supposed to come until January." Grace did a quick assessment. Both babies were coming. First one was crowning. No time for anything but survival. "Okay, Caroline, I need you to focus on me. Your babies are coming tonight, and we're going to do this together." For the next 23 minutes, Grace delivered twins in an elevator stuck between floors. She coached Caroline through pushing, caught the first baby, a girl, tiny and purple, who screamed with healthy lungs after Grace cleared her airway. Daniel sobbed openly, cutting the cord with the scissors from Grace's kit. Then the second baby, a boy, smaller than his sister, who came out silent and blue. Grace's training took over. She cleared his airway, began gentle chest compressions and rescue breathing, while Daniel held his screaming daughter, and Caroline begged, "Is he okay? Is my son okay?" 30 seconds. 45. Grace breathed for the baby, compressed his tiny chest, whispered prayers she hadn't said in years. Then he gasped, coughed, started breathing. Not strong, but breathing. Grace wrapped both twins skin to skin against Caroline, monitoring vitals, keeping them warm with emergency blankets from her kit. That's when she noticed the time on her watch. 11:47 p.m., December 6th, the same date, the same time, 30 years exactly. Grace's hand started shaking. She'd delivered hundreds of babies in 16 years as a paramedic. She was good at compartmentalizing, staying professional. But this, twins, December 6th, 11:47 p.m., was too specific, too impossible. The fire department arrived at 12:15 a.m. They pried the elevator doors open fully, brought in a gurney for Caroline and warming units for the twins. A full medical team stabilized everyone, prepared to transport to the NICU 3 floors down. Grace was finishing her report when Caroline reached for her hand. "Thank you," Caroline whispered. "You saved their lives. What's your name again?" "Grace Washington." "Grace. We're going to name our daughter after you. Grace Hammond. If that's okay." Something broke inside Grace. 30 years of carefully constructed walls. She looked at these tiny twins, girl and boy, fighting to breathe, so fragile. And she saw them. Her twins. The ones she'd given birth to alone in a county hospital. The ones she'd held for exactly 4 minutes before social services took them away. December 6th, 11:47 p.m., 30 years ago. Grace leaned close to Caroline and whispered something that would haunt Caroline for weeks to come. "I gave birth to twins on this exact date, exactly 30 years ago. Same time. I was 23, alone, and I gave them up for adoption." Then Grace pulled back, professional mask slipping back into place. "The NICU team will take excellent care of them. Congratulations." She was gone before Caroline could process what she'd heard. Caroline Hammond sat in her private hospital room, the kind money could buy, with a couch and a coffee machine and walls painted calming blue, staring at the business card she'd tracked down through the hospital's HR department. Grace Washington, paramedic, 16 years of service. The twins were stable. Still in NICU, still fragile, but the doctors were cautiously optimistic. Daniel was with them now, reading aloud from a book about investing because he didn't know what else to do. And Caroline couldn't stop thinking about what Grace had whispered. December 6th, twins, adoption, exactly 30 years ago. It was probably just a bizarre coincidence, a traumatic coincidence that had made Grace share something deeply personal in a moment of overwhelming emotion. But Caroline was an investigator by nature. She'd made her own fortune before marrying Daniel, had built a private equity firm from nothing by being better at due diligence than anyone else in the industry. She saw patterns, connected dots others missed, and these dots were screaming at her. She picked up her phone and called her personal attorney. "Michael, I need you to run a completely confidential background check, everything. And I need access to adoption records from 30 years ago. Caroline, those are sealed. Find a way. Please." She hung up and looked at the business card again. What if it wasn't a coincidence? What if Grace Washington was connected to Caroline's family somehow? What if? No. That was insane. Impossible. But Caroline hadn't built a fortune by ignoring impossible questions. To understand what happened next, you need to know Grace's origin story. Grace Washington was born in Detroit in 1970 to a single mother who worked 3 jobs and still barely kept them housed. She grew up in apartments that changed every 6 months when they couldn't make rent. She wore donated clothes and learned to make a meal from government cheese and creativity. But Grace was smart. Scholarship smart. She tested into a magnet high school, graduated third in her class, got accepted to nursing school with financial aid. Then at 20, during her sophomore year of nursing school, Grace fell in love with Marcus Taylor. Pre-med, ambitious, beautiful. They were going to be medical power couple, both dedicated to serving underserved communities. Grace got pregnant at 22, with twins. Marcus disappeared within a week of finding out. Just gone. Dropped out of school, moved states, blocked her number. Years later, she'd hear he became a surgeon in California, married someone appropriate. Never looked back. Grace tried to continue school, but morning sickness was all-day sickness. She couldn't afford childcare for one baby, let alone two. She was failing classes, drowning in nausea and exhaustion and fear. At 7 months pregnant, Grace made the hardest decision of her life. She signed adoption papers through a private Christian agency. Closed adoption. She'd never know where her babies went. The social worker had been kind, but firm. "You're doing the right thing. These babies will have opportunities you can't provide." Grace gave birth alone in a county hospital on December 6, 1993, at 11:47 p.m. A girl first, then a boy. Both healthy despite her poor prenatal care. Both beautiful. She held them for 4 minutes, memorized their faces. Then they were gone. Grace spiraled after that, dropped out of school completely, worked minimum wage jobs, struggled with depression so severe she could barely function. It was her aunt, a paramedic, who'd pulled her out. You wanted to help people? Become a paramedic. You don't need a nursing degree, just training and heart. Grace had done exactly that. At 28, she became a paramedic. At 33, she bought a small house. At 40, she'd saved enough to finally feel stable. But every December 6th, Grace relived that hospital room, wondered where her twins were, if they were happy, if they ever thought about her, if giving them up had been the right choice or the cowardice she secretly feared. 16 years as a paramedic, hundreds of babies delivered, but none on December 6th at 11:47 p.m. Until now. Daniel Hammond had resources that most people couldn't imagine. Private investigators, legal teams, technology that could data mine in ways that would make most people uncomfortable. Caroline had told him everything Grace whispered. And Daniel, who'd built his fortune on pattern recognition and data analysis, immediately saw what Caroline saw. The timeline matched, the date, the circumstances. But it was impossible, right? What were the odds? Daniel did the math. With approximately 3.7 million births per year in the U.S., and approximately 3% of those being twins, and assuming roughly equal distribution across 365 days, the odds of random chance? Roughly 1 in 125,000 that someone would deliver twins on the exact anniversary of their own twin birth. Not impossible, but improbable enough to warrant investigation. Daniel hired a private investigator, the discreet kind that wealthy people use when they don't want publicity. He gave them Grace's name, birth date, and one directive. Find out everything about her adoption situation 30 years ago, but do it quietly and ethically. 3 weeks later, the investigator returned with a file. Grace Washington had given birth to twins on December 6, 1993, at County General Hospital. The babies had been placed through Blessed Hope Adoption Services, a private Christian agency that had since closed due to mismanagement of funds. Records were sparse. The Premature agency's files had been sealed and transferred to state custody when it closed. But there were breadcrumbs. The investigator had found a nurse who'd worked at County General in 1993. She remembered Grace, a young girl, alone, crying through the whole birth. And she remembered the babies being transferred to Blessed Hope's approved adoptive families. They always placed twins separately back then, the nurse said. Thought it was better for the children. Give them each individual attention. Separated. Grace's twins had been separated. Daniel felt sick. Did you keep any records? Anything that might tell us where they went? Honey, that was 30 years ago. Those records are sealed tighter than Fort Knox. Adoption laws are strict for a reason. The investigator had tried legal channels, all blocked. Adoption records from that era were confidential unless both biological parents and adopted children petitioned to open them. Dead end. Except, Caroline was the one who noticed it. She was reviewing the paperwork from Grace's emergency intervention, medical reports, consent forms, the works. And she noticed Grace's birth date on her employment file, March 15th, 1970. Caroline did the math. Grace was 53 now, which meant when she gave birth to twins in December 1993, she was 23 years old. Caroline opened her own adoption file, the one her parents had given her when she turned 18, and demanded to know the truth about her origins. She'd been adopted as an infant through a private Christian agency in Michigan. Birth mother's information. Redacted. Birth date, December 6th, 1993. Caroline's hands started shaking. She had a twin brother. She'd known this her whole life. Her adoptive parents had told her. But they'd been separated at birth, placed with different families. Her parents had tried to adopt both, but were told it wasn't possible. She'd spent years trying to find him, had registered with every adoption reunion database, had done DNA tests hoping for a match. Nothing. Her twin was a ghost, until now. Caroline looked at the dates again, looked at Grace's file, looked at the impossible coincidence. She called her adoptive mother. Mom, what was the name of the adoption agency? Honey, why? Please, what was the name? A pause. Blessed Hope, out of Detroit. It closed years ago under some scandal. Caroline hung up, stared at her hands, at the business card for Grace Washington that she'd been carrying for 3 weeks. The paramedic who delivered her premature twins was the woman who'd given birth to Caroline 30 years ago. Grace Washington was her biological mother, which meant somewhere out there, Caroline had a twin brother who was also Grace's biological child. The brother she'd been searching for her entire life. Caroline showed up at Grace's house on a Saturday afternoon in January, without warning, without permission, with her heart hammering so hard she thought she might pass out. The house was small but well-maintained, a modest neighborhood, working class but proud, nothing like the mansion Caroline lived in. She knocked, waited, knocked again. Grace opened the door in jeans and a sweater, reading glasses perched on her head, looking confused. Can I help you? Hi, I'm Caroline Hammond. You delivered my twins in an elevator 6 weeks ago. Recognition flashed across Grace's face. Oh, hello. How are the babies? They're home now. Doing well. Both healthy. Caroline's voice was shaking. Can I come in? I need to talk to you about something. Grace hesitated, then stepped aside. They sat in Grace's small living room, family photos on the walls. Grace with what looked like extended family, nieces and nephews probably. No photos of children that might be her own. What's this about? Grace asked carefully. Caroline pulled out a folder. I've been investigating something. Not because I wanted to invade your privacy, but because what you whispered to me in that elevator has been haunting me for 6 weeks. Grace went very still. You said you gave birth to twins 30 years ago, December 6th, 1993, through adoption. Caroline opened the folder. I was born December 6th, 1993, adopted through Blessed Hope Adoption Services out of Detroit. along with my twin brother, who was placed separately. Grace's face had gone ashen. I've spent my entire life looking for my twin brother and my biological mother. And I think, Caroline's voice broke. I think you're her. I think you're my mother. The silence stretched for a full minute. Grace stared at the documents Caroline had spread on her coffee table. Birth dates, hospital records, adoption agency information. Finally, Grace whispered, "They told me the adoption was closed, that I'd never know where my babies went, that it was better that way." "I know, but I found you anyway." Grace looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I held you for 4 minutes. I counted. Exactly 4 minutes before they took you away. You had this tiny birthmark on your left shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon." Caroline pulled down her sweater collar. The birthmark was still there. They both started crying. After an hour of tears and partial stories and overwhelming emotion, they got down to logistics. Grace told Caroline everything she remembered about the birth, the hospital, the social worker named Patricia Chen, the way the babies had been taken separately, girl first, then boy. "I begged them to keep you together," Grace said, "but they said separate placements were better, that you'd each get individual attention that way. I was 23 and alone, and had no legal standing to argue." Caroline told Grace about her life, about her adoptive parents, kind people who'd given her opportunities, about building her business, about marrying Daniel, about searching for her twin brother for 20 years with no results. "What's his name?" Grace asked. "Your brother. The one you're looking for." "I don't know. My adoptive parents only knew that he existed. They tried to get information but were blocked." Caroline leaned forward. "But I have resources now. Money, investigators, legal teams. If you give me permission, I can search properly." Grace looked at her, this accomplished, brilliant woman who was her daughter. "I've wondered about you every single day for 30 years, and now you're here, and you have children of your own, and you're telling me we can find your brother. Our brother. Yes, I think we can. Then do it. Find him. Please." Caroline nodded, then hesitated. "Grace, can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you give us up?" Grace took a deep breath and told her daughter the truth. About Marcus disappearing, about being in nursing school, broke and alone, about the conviction that she couldn't give her babies the life they deserved. "I thought I was doing the right thing," Grace said, "giving you to families who could provide stability, education, opportunities I couldn't. And maybe I was right. Look at you. You're successful, educated, happy. Maybe that wouldn't have happened if you'd been raised by a broke single mother in Detroit. Or maybe," Caroline said gently, "you underestimated yourself. Maybe we would have been fine. Different, but fine. I'll never know. That's the burden I carry." They sat together in Grace's small living room, mother and daughter, connected by biology and an impossible coincidence, and began the work of becoming something to each other. Daniel threw resources at finding Caroline's twin brother that would have made most people uncomfortable. But he'd seen Caroline's face when she came home from Grace's house, seen her cry in his arms about the mother she'd just met and the brother she still hadn't found. He wanted to give her this, to use his obscene wealth for something that actually mattered. The challenge was that adoption records from 1993 were locked down tight. But Daniel had learned that every system has cracks if you know where to look. He started with DNA databases. Caroline had uploaded her DNA to every ancestry service available. No hits. But most people hadn't done DNA tests. The odds her brother had were slim. So Daniel went a different route. He hired a genealogist, the kind that could build family trees from fragmentary data. He gave them everything they had about Grace's family line and told them to map every possible branch. Then he hired a team of investigators to track down every male child adopted through Blessed Hope Adoption Services in December 1993. There were 43, all with sealed records. Daniel's legal team started filing petitions to open adoption records. It was a long shot, required consent from all parties. But they had Grace's consent. They had Caroline's consent as the twin. The question was whether the adopted children would even know to respond. Weeks passed, then months. Nothing. Caroline was getting discouraged. Maybe he doesn't want to be found. Maybe he's happy not knowing. Or maybe, Daniel said, he's been searching too and just hasn't found the right clue yet. It happened on a Tuesday in April, 4 months after Caroline met Grace. Caroline's phone pinged with a notification from one of the DNA ancestry websites. Immediate family match detected. She nearly dropped her phone. The match was listed as Marcus Washington. 50% DNA shared. Relationship. Full sibling. Caroline's hands shook as she clicked through to the profile. The account was bare bones, just a name, age, 30, and location. Detroit, Michigan. He'd uploaded his DNA 2 weeks ago. Caroline immediately sent a message through the platform. Marcus, I think you might be my twin brother. I was born December 6, 1993 in Detroit and adopted through Blessed Hope. Please contact me. She waited. 1 hour, 2 hours, 6 hours. Nothing. At 11 p.m., Daniel found her staring at her phone in their bedroom. Any response? No. What if he doesn't check? What if he uploaded his DNA and forgot about it? Daniel sat down beside her. Then we find another way. We have his name now. Marcus Washington. That's more than we had yesterday. Washington, Caroline repeated, like Grace. She mentioned giving them her last name on the birth certificates, even though they'd be adopted out. Caroline opened her laptop and started searching. Marcus Washington, 30 years old, Detroit. There were dozens, hundreds. The name was too common. But one result made her stop scrolling. A LinkedIn profile. Marcus Washington, trauma surgeon, Detroit Memorial Hospital. Caroline clicked through. The profile picture showed a black man in his 30s with warm eyes and a careful smile. In his bio, born December 6, 1993, dedicated to serving the Detroit community that raised me. December 6, 1993. That's him, Caroline whispered. Oh my God, that's him. Caroline composed and deleted 17 drafts of an email before finally sending, Dr. Washington, you don't know me, but my name is Caroline Hammond. I believe we share a birthday, December 6, 1993, and a biological mother named Grace Washington, who gave us up for adoption through Blessed Hope Adoption Services in Detroit. I recently uploaded my DNA to ancestry databases and received a match showing you as my full sibling. I've been searching for you my entire life. If you're open to talking, I'd like to meet you. No pressure, no expectations. Just, I'd like to know my brother. Sincerely, Caroline. She hit send before she could overthink it further. 2 hours later, her phone rang. Unknown number. Detroit area code. Caroline answered with shaking hands. Hello? Caroline, this is Marcus Washington. I got your email and your DNA message, and I don't even know where to start. His voice was warm, cautious, overwhelmed. Caroline started crying immediately. I've been looking for you for 20 years, she said. I knew I had a twin brother. My adoptive parents told me we were separated. I've been searching, but I had no information, no name, nothing. Same, Marcus said, his own voice thick with emotion. I registered with reunion databases, did DNA tests. My parents, my adoptive parents, they're amazing. But they always told me I had a twin sister out there. I never stopped wondering. They talked for 3 hours about their separate lives. Marcus had been adopted by a middle-class black family in Detroit, a teacher, and an engineer who'd given him stability and love. He'd gone to medical school, become a trauma surgeon, dedicated his life to serving the community he grew up in. Caroline told him about her adoptive parents, her business, her husband Daniel, her newborn twins. "Wait," Marcus said. "You just had twins?" "Yes. December 6th. They came early. That's the date we were born." "I know, and it gets weirder." Caroline took a deep breath. "The paramedic who delivered them in a stuck elevator? That was Grace, our biological mother. She delivered my twins on the 30th anniversary of delivering us, and that's how I found her." The silence on the line was absolute. Finally, Marcus said, "That's impossible. I know, but it happened. And she's here. Grace is here, and she wants to meet you. If you're ready." Another long pause. "I need to think about it. This is a lot. I understand. Take all the time you need. But Marcus, I'm so glad I found you. Me too. Me too." Marcus needed 2 weeks to process before he was ready. 2 weeks of phone calls with Caroline. 2 weeks of looking at photos she sent. Pictures of Grace, of the twins, of their shared birthdate coincidence. Finally, Marcus agreed to meet. Neutral territory. A coffee shop in downtown Detroit, halfway between where Marcus worked and where Grace lived. Caroline flew in from New York with Daniel. Grace took the day off work for the first time in 5 years. They met on a Saturday morning in May, 6 months after Grace had delivered Caroline's twins in an elevator. 30 years and 5 months after she'd given birth to both of them. Marcus was already there when they arrived, sitting at a corner table, looking nervous. He stood when he saw them enter. For a moment, nobody moved. Grace stared at her son, the boy she'd held for exactly 4 minutes before he was taken away. Now, a man, a doctor, alive and real in front of her. Marcus stared at his biological mother and his twin sister, seeing family resemblance in both their faces. Caroline stared at her brother. Same birthday, same DNA, completely different life. Then Grace started crying, and Marcus started crying, and Caroline was already crying. They crashed together in the middle of the coffee shop, 3 people connected by biology and separation and an impossible coincidence, and held each other like they could make up for 30 lost years. They talked for 6 hours in that coffee shop, closed it down, moved to a nearby park, kept talking. Marcus told them about his childhood, good parents, stable home, always knowing he was adopted, and always wondering about the siblings he might have. About choosing medicine because he wanted to serve the community that raised him. About the strange pull he'd always felt toward December 6th. Grace told them about that day 30 years ago, about Marcus's father disappearing, about the agony of the decision, about holding them each for 4 minutes and memorizing their faces. "I thought about you every single day," Grace said. "Every birthday, I'd wonder where you were, what you looked like, if you were happy, if you hated me for giving you up." "I don't hate you," Marcus said quietly. "My parents explained it to me when I was old enough. They said my birth mother loved me enough to give me opportunities she couldn't provide. I understood that. Intellectually. But emotionally?" Marcus looked away. "Emotionally, there was always a part of me that wondered if I wasn't enough, if I'd cried too much or been too difficult, if that's why you gave us up." Grace made a sound like she'd been physically struck. "No, God, no. You were perfect. Both of you. I gave you up because I was broken, not because you were. Because I was 23 and alone and terrified I'd fail you." "Did you?" Caroline asked quietly. "Fail us? I don't know. You both turned out amazing, successful, accomplished, doing good in the world. Maybe that wouldn't have happened if you'd grown up with me." Grace looked between them. But I also robbed us of 30 years. Robbed you of each other. That's what haunts me. My parents wanted to adopt both of us, Caroline said. They tried. The agency said no. So did mine, Marcus added. They specifically asked about my twin. We're told it wasn't possible. Grace's face darkened. The agency told me separate placements were better, that you'd each get individual attention. I didn't know I could fight them. I didn't know I had any power at all. They sat with that for a moment, the systemic choices that had shaped all their lives. Can I ask you something? Marcus finally said. Why did you become a paramedic? Grace smiled sadly. Because I wanted to help people. Because after I gave you up, I felt like I'd failed at the most important thing. So I spent the rest of my life trying to save everyone else's children. You saved mine, Caroline said. In that elevator. If you hadn't been there. I was there because I always work December 6th, every year. It's my penance and my vigil. The day I gave you up is the day I dedicate to saving lives. Marcus reached across the table and took his mother's hand. You saved us by giving us up. I know that probably sounds like I'm justifying your pain. But Grace, Mom, I had a good life. A really good life. And I think you made that possible. Same, Caroline said, taking Grace's other hand. My parents loved me fiercely, gave me every opportunity. I wouldn't be who I am without them. But you also wouldn't know each other, Grace said. That's what I took from you, and I can never give that back. No, Marcus said, but we have now. We have today and tomorrow and every day after. That's not nothing. They sat together in the park as the sun set. 3 people who shared DNA and loss and an impossible reunion, and tried to figure out how to be family. Over the next months, they worked to build something. It wasn't simple or easy. There were awkward moments, hurt feelings, miscommunications born from 3 decades of separation. Caroline's adoptive parents were supportive, but also processing their own complex emotions. They'd raised Caroline, loved her, been her real parents. Now she had a biological mother, and they weren't sure where that left them. Marcus's parents had similar struggles. They'd given Marcus everything, and now this other woman, his biological mother, was entering his life. Grace wrestled with guilt and grief. She loved Caroline and Marcus, but they'd been raised by other people. They had parents, real parents, who'd done the actual work. Grace was biological connection, not the woman who'd packed school lunches or attended soccer games. Daniel watched it all and tried to support Caroline through the emotional complexity. Their twins, now 6 months old, were healthy and thriving. Caroline had named their daughter Grace, and now that name meant even more. They all tried to navigate what reunion actually looked like. It wasn't a Hallmark movie. It was complicated and messy, and sometimes painful. But it was also real. And it mattered. December 6th, 2024, 31 years after Grace gave birth to twins. 1 year after she delivered Caroline's twins in an elevator. They all gathered at Caroline and Daniel's house for what they'd decided to call Family Day. Not Thanksgiving, not Christmas, their own holiday, built around the date that connected them all. Grace came with her sister and nieces. Marcus brought his adoptive parents, who'd grown to appreciate Grace over the year. Caroline's adoptive parents were there too, navigating the complexity of expanded family with Grace. And in the center of it all, Caroline's twins, now 1-year-old, crawling and babbling, and being passed around by people who loved them. Grace held her granddaughter, her biological granddaughter, and thought about the impossible chain of events that led here. If the elevator hadn't gotten stuck, if she'd been off duty, if Caroline's twins had waited 1 more day to be born. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, sitting beside her. Coincidence versus fate. whether there's a difference. Marcus smiled. As a doctor, I believe in biological processes and probability. But as your son, I think some coincidences are too perfect to be random. You sound like a scientist who wants to believe in magic. Maybe I am. Maybe we all need some magic. Caroline joined them, holding her son. Grace, Marcus, can I tell you something? I've been thinking about this for months. They both looked at her. I spent 20 years searching for my brother, and I found him because you delivered my children in an elevator on the exact anniversary of our birth. That moment, that impossible, traumatic, beautiful moment, gave me my family back. She looked at Grace. I don't believe in God or fate or destiny, but I believe in the power of one person showing up. You showed up in that elevator. You showed up 31 years ago when you made an impossible choice. You keep showing up. Grace started crying. I gave you up. And you saved me. Both times. You gave me life twice. Once when you gave birth to me, and once when you delivered my children and whispered the truth that led me to you. Marcus put his arm around Grace. She's right. You've spent 30 years feeling like you failed us. But you didn't. You made us possible. And then, you found us again. I didn't find you. You found me. Because you left clues. Because you became exactly who you needed to be in that elevator that night. Marcus squeezed her shoulder. A paramedic who works December 6th every year, who delivers babies, who saves lives. You became the person who could bring your family back together. Grace looked around the room, at her biological children and their parents, multiple sets of parents, all of whom loved the same kids, at her grandchildren, at the life that had seemed impossible a year ago. I've missed 30 years, she said quietly. Then let's not miss any more, Caroline said. But reunion came with prices none of them had anticipated. Grace struggled with depression that winter. 30 years of grief she'd suppressed came flooding back. She'd built a life around service and sacrifice, and now she had to figure out what it meant to accept love instead of just giving it. She started therapy for the first time in her life at 54 years old. Marcus wrestled with divided loyalties. His adoptive parents had given him everything, and he loved them fiercely. But he also wanted relationship with Grace and Caroline. Sometimes those wants felt mutually exclusive. He learned to hold both truths. You can have multiple mothers. Love isn't finite. Caroline dealt with imposter syndrome around family. She'd been raised with wealth and privilege. Marcus had grown up middle class. Grace had spent decades working class. Their different socioeconomic realities created tension nobody wanted to acknowledge. In therapy, Caroline confronted her guilt. I got lucky with my placement and he didn't. You both got lucky, her therapist corrected. In different ways. The economy doesn't determine love. And the adoptive parents, all four of them, processed their own complex feelings. They'd done the real work of raising these children. Now they watched biological connections form and wondered where that left them. Caroline's mother put it best. I raised you. I love you. And Grace gave birth to you and loves you. Both things can be true. Both things are true. Family, they all learned, wasn't zero-sum, but it was complicated. A year and a half after the elevator incident, a documentary filmmaker approached them about telling their story. She'd heard about it through the hospital grapevine and thought it represented something important about adoption, reunion, and coincidence. They debated for months. Grace was private, uncomfortable with attention. Marcus worried about patient privacy at his hospital. Caroline worried about exploitation, but ultimately they agreed. With conditions. The filmmaker could tell their story, but only if she told all of it. The joy and the pain, the beautiful reunion and the complicated reality. The adoptive parents' perspectives, the cost of separation, and the complexity of coming back together. The documentary premiered at a film festival 18 months later. It was called December 6th, A Story of Separation and Return. The response was overwhelming. Adoptees reached out by the thousands, sharing their own reunion stories or their ongoing searches. Birth mothers shared their grief and guilt. Adoptive parents shared their fears and love. The story resonated because it was honest. It didn't pretend reunion fixed everything. It showed that family was complicated and beautiful and messy and worth fighting for. Grace became an accidental advocate for open adoption. She gave talks about the trauma of closed adoption, the importance of medical history, the right of adoptees to know their origins. "I'm not anti-adoption," she'd say in interviews. "I'm anti-secrecy. My children deserve to know where they came from. I deserve to know they were okay. The system that kept us apart for 30 years served nobody." 3 years after the elevator incident, Grace, Marcus, and Caroline gathered at Grace's house for a quiet dinner. Just the three of them, without extended family or complex dynamics. Marcus was now 33, Caroline 33, Grace 56. "Can I ask you something?" Caroline said over dessert. "Something I've wanted to ask for 3 years." "Anything," Grace said. "Do you regret it? Giving us up?" Grace was quiet for a long moment. "I regret the system that made me feel like I had no choice. I regret 30 years of not knowing you. I regret that you and Marcus didn't grow up together." "But do you regret the actual decision?" Grace looked at her children, both accomplished, both loved by the families who raised them, both doing good in the world. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it, because I look at who you became, and I can't regret the choices that made that possible. But I also can't celebrate a system that separated you from each other, and me from both of you." "That's not a satisfying answer," Marcus said. "No, but it's an honest one. Adoption is complicated. It's loss and gain simultaneously. You can't celebrate reunion without acknowledging the separation that made reunion necessary." They sat with that. Truth. That some questions don't have clean answers. "I found you," Caroline said eventually, "because of an impossible coincidence, because you showed up in an elevator on the exact anniversary of our birth, because you whispered the truth. And I'm grateful," Marcus added, "every day. But I also wonder about all the people who don't get impossible coincidences, who search forever and never find their families." Grace reached across the table and took both their hands. "Then we honor them by telling our story honestly, by acknowledging how rare this is, by fighting for systems that don't require miracles for families to know each other." December 6th, 2027. 34 years after Grace gave birth to twins. 4 years after she delivered Caroline's twins in an elevator. Caroline's twins, Grace and Daniel Jr., were now 4 years old. Old enough to understand that they had an extra grandmother named Grace, and an Uncle Marcus, and a complicated family tree that required diagrams. Grace, now 57, had cut back her hours as a paramedic. She still worked December 6th every year. Some rituals were too important to break. But she also made time for her grandchildren, for her biological children, for the life she was learning to build instead of just survive. Marcus had gotten married. His wife, another doctor, understood complex family dynamics and loved Grace immediately. And Caroline had finally made peace with the privilege she'd been given. She'd started a foundation supporting foster and adoptive families, particularly focusing on keeping siblings together. They gathered again, extended family, adoptive parents, biological connections, for their annual December 6th celebration. At one point, Caroline's daughter tugged on Grace's sleeve. "Grandma Grace, Daddy says you delivered me in an elevator." "I did, baby. You and your brother both." "Was it scary?" Grace looked at Caroline, at Marcus, at the impossible family that had formed from trauma and coincidence and 30 years of separation. It was the scariest and most important thing I've ever done, because it brought us all together. The little girl considered this. Because you're our family? Yes, honey, because we're family. And Grace realized it was true, not in spite of the separation and reunion, but because of it. They were family, complicated, messy, forged from loss, and found through impossible luck. The elevator had been stuck for 47 minutes, but it had opened a door to everything that mattered. There is no perfect ending to this story, because family stories don't end. They evolve. Grace still wrestles with guilt some days, still marks December 6th as both her darkest day and her greatest gift. Still wonders what would have happened if she'd kept her babies. But she also has her grandchildren in her life, has Sunday dinners with Marcus, has morning phone calls with Caroline, has a place in a family she thought she'd lost forever. Marcus still sometimes feels split between two families, still navigates complicated loyalties, still explains to people that he has two mothers, and both of them are real. But he also has his twin sister, has his biological mother, has expanded family that's bigger and messier and more beautiful than he imagined. Caroline still struggles with survivor's guilt about her privileged upbringing, still feels like an imposter sometimes, still worries she doesn't deserve the good fortune that came from someone else's loss. But she also has her brother, has her mother, biological and adoptive, has her children, who'll grow up knowing where they come from. And they all have December 6th, the date that connects them, the anniversary that's both trauma and miracle. 4 years ago, Grace delivered twins in a stuck elevator and whispered a truth that changed everything. She couldn't have known then that she was delivering her own grandchildren, that her biological daughter would hear the whisper and investigate, that her biological son had been searching too. She couldn't have known that showing up, doing her job, being present, would be the catalyst that brought her family back. But maybe that's the lesson, that you show up anyway, that you do the work in front of you, that you leave truth like breadcrumbs, hoping someone finds their way. Grace showed up in an elevator at 11:47 p.m. on December 6th, 2023, delivered 2 premature twins, saved their lives, and in doing so, saved her own. Family isn't just biology. It's not just the people who raise you. It's not just coincidence or fate. It's showing up. It's whispering truth. It's holding hands across decades of separation. It's an elevator stuck between floors and a paramedic who stayed. It's December 6th, again and always.